Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. I'm Mitali Mukherjee. Deep damage is visible and the scars remain for the Indian economy. At this point, we are still in a wave of downgrades. In fact, most recently, the IMF has downgraded India's growth target for 2021-2022 to 9.5% from 12.5%. But the bigger problem is what's happening on the unemployment front. That has been, frankly, an Achilles heel for this government. The numbers did not look pretty even before COVID, but after COVID and after multiple lockdowns, it's gone into a bit of a tailspin. While many seem to focus on what's happening with that core unemployment rate, there's a bigger story playing out in labor force. Essentially, that means how many people are coming out into the market looking for work. And on that, we are actually tracking lower and lower, simply put, because less and less people are feeling confident or enthused when they come out looking for a job because they find nothing. CMIE has been tracking that data for a long time, of course, and Mahesh Vyas joins me to talk about what he's seen so far in 2021 and why he's worried about what that points to for the months ahead. Mahesh, thank you for speaking with me. We're touching base after a couple of months, I think, and we're also at the halfway mark of this year. I wanted to get a sense of whether there was anything that you've spotted as a trend in terms of unemployment numbers from Jan to now. I realize, of course, that some of it comes with, attendant lockdowns and then the impact post that. But what have you seen so far?
2021 has not been very good, even before the second wave. So 2020, we saw the terrible lockdown, its severe impact, loss of jobs, loss of income, severe stress in households. But we saw a quick recovery from there. And the recovery was quite smart, beginning somewhere around June and was quite good all the way to September. Then in September, the recovery slowed down. But nevertheless, there was a recovery all the way to December. And I think we peaked out in January. So January 21, we peaked out the recovery. And since then, the story hasn't been good. So February, March also saw a fall in employment.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we hit the second wave and things became very bad after that. So 2021 began not on a very good note. So it looks like the first wave came when the economy was weak and kind of going down. And the second wave also came when the economy wasn't in the best of its shape. So it wasn't good. Now, we have recovered from the second wave. So all that hit us has been recovered or is almost recovered in the month of July. So we had a bad April, May, and June. But July, the early numbers tell us that the unemployment rate is coming back to where it was earlier. The labor force participation rate is coming back to where it was earlier, and even the employment rate. So there is recovery in July. The recovery from the second wave has been better than the recovery from the first wave. But even after that, we are worse off than we were before the first wave. So in summary, 2021 hasn't been a good year so far.
So just to iterate, Mahesh, for July, where is it that we stand at in terms of overall unemployment and, of course, how that cuts across for rural and urban?
Unemployment rate is somewhere around 7.5% or so, which isn't too bad. Yeah. So it's not the unemployment rate that's really the stress point. The stress point is actually in the labor force participation rate. Yeah. So in June, in the quarter ended June, which is a little broader, it was at 40%. And I think we have risen to 41%. So that's the good part of the labor force participation rate. And the labor force participation rate before the first wave was 42.7%. So even after the recovery, we are 1.5% or so lower than what we were earlier. So 42.7% before the first wave hit us, and we will be best case 41% now on the labor force participation rate. The labor force's participation rate is always better in rural India compared to urban India, and that story remains even now. Mm-hmm. On the employment rate, we were at a little less than 40% earlier, 39.5% before the first wave hit us. We went down severely. And I think in July, we will end at around 37%, 37.5% or so. So that's a recovery, but still it leaves a big gap. So I think that's where the problem is. The unemployment rate is not an adequate indicator of stress in the labor markets.
Is it also not ironic, Mahesh, that we have this conversation about unemployment and of course labor force and how the numbers are actually looking far more stark for this year in the context of where most people are go at lengths to say that this time round the economic impact has not been that hard. 2021 has been limited lockdowns, hence we're not going to see that much economic damage. I mean, this incongruity just exists and carries on through from 2020 to 2021.
The Indian economy is so big, is so diverse. There are so many things to look at. You can pick what you would like to say. You can choose to see the numbers which tell you a good story. You can pick the numbers which paint a not so good story. So, for example, you can say electricity consumption has not been impacted. Look, we are doing very well. Look at our trade numbers. Exports and imports are doing remarkably well. We are just thundering along. So, look, the economy couldn't be in bad shape. If it was so bad, how would exports and imports continue to grow so well? So, the stock markets are doing so well as well for the better part of 2021. So, you can even look at the corporate sector. That the profits of the corporate sector, the listed corporate sector, is fantastic. It's the best profits that they have made in their lifetime. The profitability and aggregate profits are the best. So these are not fictitious numbers, mind you. This is not fake numbers. Yeah. There's no measurement problem over here. There's no dispute that the corporate sector has done very well. So you can pick what you would like to pick on. But in my opinion, if you look at the economy as a whole, the picture is not as good as the few indicators would tell you. So, for example, let's look at one simple number that corporate profits are very high, but corporate tax collection by government is low. So, it's a zero-sum game. It looks like the large companies have done well, but the smaller ones haven't done well. If you add them up, we haven't done well. So, if you don't cherry pick, then the picture is not very good.
Let me also take the bull by its horn in terms of this data collection debate, Mahesh, which CMIE has been in the center of. First up, of course, there is the NSO data, which is just out, which indicates that labor indicators recorded an all-round improvement in 2019-20. This is their observation, saying the unemployment rate fell to 4.8% in 2019-20. Again, there are other economists who have made the point that perhaps your sample survey does not cover the very poor or those hugely impacted by this lockdown or by economic distress. It's something that Pranab Sen has also echoed, saying perhaps we need to relook the way we collect this data. How do you respond to these arguments, and how do you respond to the core one saying, look, monthly is not the way to be plotting it; it's too erratic?
Many questions.
Yeah.
So let me take the first one to depict that the NSO's PLFS says that the unemployment rate is down to 4.8%. That is true, but that's true if you use the usual status. The usual status for the period 2019-20, from July 2019 through June 20. So if there is a person who was employed for 1 month in any of the 12 months of this period, then that person is considered to be employed. So the person could have lost her job and not been employed for the entire pandemic period, but the person will still be considered to be employed because that person was employed at least 1 month sometime in this 12-month period. That's the usual status. So you take all the people of India, if they were employed before the pandemic, then they are considered employed in this 2019-20 number. I think that is a problem, to say the least. It makes a joke of the entire problem that we faced in the country. You can't be measuring unemployment in this manner by saying that if you were employed before, we'll still consider you to be employed. But the PLFS also produces one more number called the current weekly status. That doesn't show you a decline in the unemployment rate. that shows a small increase, very small increase, 8.7 to 8.8%. But note that number is much higher, 8.7, 8.8%. It's a high unemployment rate, and that number inched up from 8.7 to 8.8%. Again, it's a matter of what do you pick. And the PLFS has honestly put out both the numbers. It's up to you to choose what you would like to use. And I think it does tell you that there was a problem in 2019-20. And if you look at the quarterly numbers, if I remember right, and I'm stretching my memory on this, the urban unemployment rate by the PLFS for the quarter of June 20 was around 20%. So they do show you stress, exactly what CMI is showing is stress. Now, the second point you made is regarding capturing poor people, etc.
Yeah.
That was a remark made. It is a comment made. It is not, and I repeat, it is not a finding. No one has done research. No one has done research to conclude that the CMI survey does not capture the poor. This is merely a remark and a conjecture that has been quoted by many people. So I can tell you, and I conduct the survey, that there is no systematic bias in the CMI survey in capturing the poor. Now you can conjecture that if you go in this manner and not in that manner, you could be losing out the poor. But the data is all available, and there are hundreds of researchers using it. Anyone can go and find out whether there is truth that CMI is not capturing the poor. In fact, that is not true. And I will put out some data on that in due course. So that is the second question that you had raised. I think there is no bias. And if there is no bias, the numbers are kosher. So unless somebody proves or indicates evidence to say that we are missing out the poor, I don't think one should take that seriously at all. And we are still taking it seriously because we are responsible to say we'll go and check everything to see if your conjecture and your passing remark is really worth its salt or not.
The specific comment from Pranav Sen, Mahesh, is the nature of the problem with panel data is that even if the panel is totally representative at the time at which the sample was selected, over the course of time, it becomes less representative. How do you respond to that specifically?
Yes, with due respect for Professor Sen, and he has told me this before he made it public also, that you're going to be careful that if you have a panel data, over time, it will become less representative. Of course, yes, over time, it will become less representative. If I had a sample which was made in 1950, and if I stuck to it even now, it would be less and less representative of the country because the country has grown in different directions. We have a method to say that we revise the entire panel once in 10 years. That's what we have, as a matter of process. And once the decadal census data becomes available, we revise the panel. That's what we did. We had the panel first made on the basis of the 2001 census. In 2013, we revised the entire sample. And so this sample is as late as 2013, 2014. Now, we also systematically refresh the sample at the rate of 1.5% per annum. So the panel hasn't remained constant since 2014. Slowly, we have added more households in rural India. We had a big, in 2017, we had a big addition in rural India. And recently, we added a few towns and we increased the urban sample as well. So I think Professor Sen's argument is bang on. He's absolutely right. But we are not failing on that. We have a system to refresh the sample. And I hope the census does happen. If it doesn't happen, we will really have to worry about the sample becoming non-representative. But I hope the census does take place and we get the data. And by 2023-24, we will redo the entire panel.
Mahesh, I mean, it's also an argument for people who are really in the thick of the world of economics to have. I mean, is it also a case where you're basically trying to shoot the messenger? I mean, by his own admission, we can't do something like a payrolls data because of the large degree of unorganized labor that we have. Isn't there some soul searching required about why we don't have accurate employment indicators and trends that the government is releasing for people to look at and to understand what exactly is happening with unemployment trends, where across genders, across regions? We have nothing.
Mitali, why do you say that? Doesn't CMI produce all this?
No, that's my point. Shouldn't the government also be doing it? I mean, they're pointing fingers at the one private agency doing it, but what is the alternative?
So I'd like to turn this upside down. For a long time, I believed that the government should continue to produce the unemployment data. And in recent times, I'm changing my view. I'm changing my view because I'm coming to the conclusion that the government is unable to do it. So we had a government that took this problem very seriously when Dr. Panagaria was in Niti Aayog, and there was a committee created which got into the problem, and they said that we should not do the old employment unemployment surveys, but instead do the PLFS, the periodic labor force survey, which should be done every year, and a quarterly unemployment rate of the urban India should also be made. And they said we should look at doing an enterprise survey, besides doing the payrolls database as well. Now, they haven't done a very good job on the PLFS front, in the sense that their ability to produce that urban unemployment rate on a quarterly basis has been, behind schedule. They should not have failed to produce the numbers during the pandemic. Suspending the survey during the pandemic was not a good idea. CMI could continue to conduct the survey. We did it telephonically. We did not miss a single day. So now, in retrospect, I'm saying, if the government, with all the resources it can muster, with all the intelligence it can draw in, and with all the money it can put in, and the footfalls it can bring deep into India, if it still cannot produce the numbers 7 years or 6 years after Panagaria set his mind to fixing it right, and if CMI can do it, it better give up and use the numbers that CMI has got and collaborate with the CMI to see how it can overcome problems that there could be in the CMI numbers, if there are any. Our sample is bigger, our execution is better, our estimations are faster. So what do you find that is missing over here? And CMI makes all the record level data available the moment the survey is complete. You can go and check everything. So it's now better for it to save its resources, conduct other surveys. We have lots to do. There is no enterprise survey in the country, for example. Please focus the government of India on conducting the enterprise survey and take the data from CMI and put it to good use on the household survey. Similarly, they still can't produce the consumption expenditure survey. If you can't, and if CMI has got a machinery to do it, collaborate with CMI or just engage CMI to take those numbers and don't reinvent the wheel. I'm making a very bold statement over here, but I think we should reassess this view that such data should only be captured by the government of India. I think that doesn't hold anymore when the private sector has, into quotes, proven that it has the resources, it has the incentives, it has the capabilities in actually doing it. And the government has persistently failed in doing it.
There is the third way, of course, of looking at it, Mahesh, which is not that the government is unable or able to do it, but that it is unwilling to track the unemployment data because of what might come through on it. But be that as it may, I want to shine a light on what you've been seeing in terms of rural trends, because I think that really has been a worrying feature of 2021 and how unemployment has been ticking higher in rural India. What have you found? Have you found things settling down? And what are the nuances really to that unemployment figure that you're picking up in rural India?
Unemployment in rural India is not an adequate indicator because it's wages we should be seeing.
Okay.
In rural India, you will have lots of places where there are lots of poor people who cannot afford not to have any employment. Employment opportunities are limited, so they may choose for Manrega or they may choose other avenues to get employment. But what I see as stress in rural India developing is not from the labor statistics, but from the monsoon and the sowing data. So the monsoon is not as good as it should have been so far, and sowing has been delayed. So the last I know is that sowing was 10% lower compared to a year ago, and this is in the middle of July. So we are almost halfway through the sowing period, and we still are lagging behind on kharif sowing. So that means that there could be some stress developing in rural India because of slow vaccinations, um, some rural distress because of the spread of the pandemic in rural India earlier on, and combine that with slow vaccination, of course, and then you have poor kharif sowing, you could have some trouble in rural economy this year.
Are you saying then that this could be a problem that is not limited just to casual labor in rural India, Mahesh? Because that tends to be the way people look at rural India. That the agri side is doing okay, it's not too bad over there, but it is some of the casual labor, the electricians, the carpenters, that entire vertical may be suffering.
So in rural India, that category is strongly linked to the MSME sector. So, and the medium and small scale enterprises are not doing very well. So they have been in difficulty for quite some time. So I think unless investments in the country as a whole don't ramp up, the non-agricultural labor is going to feel stressed. Income levels, so employment may be good, but income levels will be stressed in agriculture. In rural India. So you had difficulty in the non-farm sector, which continues, and the farm sector is getting stressed.
How does this slice across two categories that we have discussed in the past? One, what's happening with youth specifically, because that has been alarmingly high, Mahesh, as we've discussed many times. And two, region-wise, because now the debate is getting quite heated in northern India, especially amongst political parties, on what exactly is going on with unemployment, particularly in states like Haryana, Delhi NCR, of course, to a different degree.
The data shows that unemployment impacted the youth in a big way in the first wave, and that sustained itself. So we had this big difficulty regarding the youth in the first wave. In the second wave, youth suffered less. The data show that the hit in the second wave was more in the relatively grown-up people, more than earlier in men. So that means the second wave hit households a lot more severely. The hit was there in the youth as well, but not as much as it was in the first wave. So the youth do have a problem because people who were to graduate and hit the labor market saw a problem in 2020. So when June, July, when the young graduates hit the labor market after graduating, they didn't find jobs and they were sitting back home. It's a repeat in 2021. So what's going to happen in 2022? You'll have three batches of graduates, whether it is people who quit education after 8th standard or 12th standard or 10th standard or graduation, undergrads or whoever else at whatever level, they all come out around June, July to hit the labor market. In 2022, if there is no third wave or no other big black swan hitting us, we will have three cohorts hitting a labor market where investments are still very, very poor. So wages will naturally be depressed and careers are going to, they will be in a bad shape. That's the best I can say.
And at this point, what is the unemployment rate for the youth in specific?
I don't recall that number. I'm sorry, Mitali.
Okay.
But that's more in the teens or higher teens.
Yeah. There's a third category which has almost gone completely ignored, Mahesh, which is what's happening with women and unemployment, where again the figures seem quite alarmingly high. And I think, as you were detailing, has happened in rural India as well, because everything that came into the Narega scheme had more men pushing through for those job positions, which ultimately led to the women pulling out.
Yeah, so here I think this is the worst problem for India. India's demographic dividend depends almost entirely on women joining the labor force. because women labor force participation rate is extremely low. According to us, it's around 10, 11% or so. PLFS says around 20, 22% or so. Either which ways, this number is pathetically low. The PLFS has a rather easy definition of employment, and therefore it has a higher ratio there. But if you're really looking at employment, not merely some casual work being done, unpaid casual work being done for family business, that's what bumps up the number in PLFS. But we want women to come into normal, regular jobs like you and I have. That's the kind of employment, formal, real jobs which give you a decent salary. That's not happening for women at all. Until that doesn't happen, India's demographic dividend is lost. So I'm seeing women still lagging seriously behind. Uh, what is the problem? Researchers are digging into this problem. Interesting problems are being found as to what can be done to fix the problem. But I think we, as a nation, have not recognized this problem enough. Unfortunately, as you were saying earlier, it's a narrative problem with the government. The government is unwilling to accept findings from the CMI data that the female labor force participation rate in India is really very poor. So I think there's a need for a recognition for this, and then to solve the problem, to ensure that whatever be the problems of the women in joining the labor force need to be addressed so that they do come into the labor force, they do join working people in India and contribute towards the demographic dividend that we should have and whose window is open for a short while now.
Given what you've seen in 2020 and 2021, Mahesh, what do you think we're circling around to in terms of a new normal, for want of a better word, both in on the unemployment rate, in terms of the labor participation rate? Are we adjusting to a whole other level? Is it circling back to figures you've seen before in the last 5 years?
No, it's more worrying than that. I asked a question sometime back in my business standard column. What is returning back to the normal? What was the normal that we were looking forward to returning to?
Yeah.
And the reason why I asked this in a rhetorical way is that the normal was a falling labor force participation rate. And unfortunately, without completing the recovery, we have gone back to a falling labor force participation rate. That is pathetic. That is really distressing. We have amongst the lowest labor force participation rate in the world. And that's all because women don't participate in the labor markets. And we are still falling. So what kind of a normal are we going back to? What kind of a level are we going back to? We are not settling at a low labor participation rate. We are still falling. And there are many others who have found this, like Santosh Mehrotra and people, that informality is increasing. So lower participation rate, lower formality is actually getting even worse. So I think there is a serious problem over here. If the quality of jobs are not the quality of jobs that you had in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, where young graduates aspire to join an Infosys or a Tata consultancy or some such company which gave a job good enough to say that in a few years I'll buy a car, then I'll buy a house, and then I'll settle down in life. That's not the kind of jobs India is offering anymore in the kind of numbers that we want. And therefore, it's the falling labor participation rate that we're getting. That's worrisome.
You're right, Mahesh. I mean, that is a reality that we've lived through. I think the only addition, perhaps, in the last year and a half is what's happening at a household level, is it not? The way household savings have been falling, and the point that you made about how wages have been falling. The former Reserve Bank Governor, Mr. Subbarao, has written a really great piece about that. Just this deeply inequitous nature. That it seems to be the most worrying outcome from what you're laying out. There are no jobs, There are no savings anymore, but there is this slim, creamy layer that is actually doing fantastically well or even better. I mean, you mentioned the stock market, etc., but private equity, I mean, look at that. Is that the shape and form that we're taking? No jobs, but there's one part of India that's really having a hell of a party.
Yeah, so that was what was described earlier as the K-shaped recovery.
Yeah.
So the rich are getting richer, and the poor and the middle class is getting poorer. So the median income, when I last saw the number in January 2021, was when we were still at a very good peak of our recovery from the first pandemic, was 14% lower than a year ago in nominal terms. So adjust that for 6% inflation and see what happened to household incomes. I'm talking of median income. So this number doesn't shake too much because of some extreme numbers. But the median income in India in Jan 2021 was 14%, 14.5% lower than a year ago. That's stressful.
My objective is not to play gloom doom in our conversation, Mahesh, but when you think about solutions, especially for unemployment, what comes to mind? Around the budget there was so much talk of an urban jobs guarantee scheme. There is still the plea that Narega needs more. It needs more in terms of funds, it needs more in terms of spread. Should that be the two sticks to move with? Should it be something else? What should policymakers and the government be doing
No, so no, I don't know. And I don't dabble into what the solutions are. I don't make policy prescriptions. So I don't know. I don't know the answer because I don't consider that to be my job. I focus on measuring and I do make forecasts. And I think we should not run away from the gloom and doom picture that seems to face us. I think we don't complain enough. I don't think we express angst and anger enough over the sad state of affairs. If we don't take that into cognizance, and if you only celebrate the stock market doing well and private equity investors finding more places to invest, then obviously you're going to look at only one part of the story, and the situation can just get worse and worse under the carpet. So I think we need to highlight and focus a lot more on what the status is. If it is gloom and doom, then it needs to be said it is so. And if it isn't, then it needs to be said so. So I don't know what the answer to this problem is. Whether it is an urban Manrega equivalent scheme, whether it is something else, there are many complications in this. And people who work in public policy, people who work on public administration, those are the people who can find solutions to that. All I can say is that we definitely require attention on that front by taking into cognizance that there is a problem.
And what would you estimate might be the unemployment figure we're staring at by the end of the year? I know you talked about what you wanted to see or expect to see on labor force numbers, but on an unemployment figure, what do you think the year might end up looking like, Mahesh?
The unemployment rate number is not a very meaningful number because it depends upon the labor force. So what's important? I'll tell you a number which is important. We had in January 21, 400 million people employed.
Yeah.
Today we have 386 million. So we have number of people employed shrinking. That is the problem. And I just want this number to go back to where we were, 415, 420, and higher than that. I see difficulty in reaching that 420 number. So what's important is how soon will we reach 400 million again? And I hope that we will be able to reach that number by around September or so. And we should then start climbing beyond that if we don't get hit. So I am expecting, if there is no third and fourth wave, I don't really expect that to happen. I hope it doesn't happen. Then I expect the employment numbers to cross 400 million in the September-December quarter and then go beyond that. That's most important. I think it's important to look at wages, for wages to recover. I don't think wages are going to recover in this year. The median will not recover yet in this year. It will take a little longer for wages to recover. So unless the investment cycle doesn't come back, and the investment cycle will not come back because capacity utilization is low, employment will not come back, wages will not come back. These are the things that we need to worry about. And debating whether this includes poor or not is useless, because without including the poor, if I'm not including them, we are looking pretty bad.
And of course, bear in mind, I think that 383 million, that figure that you pointed to, is what with those above 15 must be at 1 billion plus. So it's representative of what's happening. Thank you, as always, Mahesh. Gloomy conversation, but important conversation. I hope the first step of even admission of a problem starts at some point this year, because that's the only way you can start fixing a problem. Thank you, as always. Great speaking with you.
Thank you.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.